Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you may be. We are grateful you are here with us today in this session. 10 years of DACA, where are we now? My name is Maria Elena Perales. I am the director of St. Joseph Justice Center for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. And I'd like to thank the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice in LMU for hosting this informative and engaging symposium. This steers us into conversation and transforms our hearts. I especially like to thank Marissa Montes, clinical director and co-founder of Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic, and Father Wayne Negrete, SJ, chaplain for Loyola Law School. They both contributed greatly to the planning of this session. Our panelists today will provide us with personal stories of struggle and resilience. They will share about their ongoing battle to protect our brothers and sisters who give so much to our nation culturally and economically. Yet our elected officials not only disregard their contributions, but continue to place them in danger of detention and deportation. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, Daisy Chávez-Mendez, who wears many hats working for the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic as a paralegal and community strategist. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she grew up in a working class neighborhood and has a keen understanding of the many challenges and disadvantages faced in underserved communities, and recognizes the power of civic engagement as a tool for change. Daisy, thank you for joining us today. And I will pass it on to you to introduce the panelists.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. Once more, my name is Daisy Chávez-Mendez, and my pronouns are she, her, ella. I will introduce our panelists in a bit, but before I do that, I wanted to share what today's format would look like, along with some logistics. Today's discussion is going to be a conversation addressing where we are with DACA currently, what the impact in the last decade has been through personal experiences, and where do we go from here. Additionally, we have support from our clinical director with the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic, Marissa Montes, who will be fielding questions in the Q&A chat box, so please feel free to type some in there. We will end by sharing some resources for those in need of a DACA renewal, or who might need a consultation. And now it is my distinct privilege to introduce our panelists. I will start with Alma de Jesus Ramirez, a dear friend and community activist. Alma is a fierce advocate for women's reproductive rights and healthcare access for everyone. Joseph Villela is an incredible force in policy. His creativity and tenacity in building political power through policy work is truly inspirational. Yurie Blons is by far the most efficient and productive law student I have ever met. Most impressively is her ability to build trust with our clients through the clinic, which in turn allows her to create strong cases for them. I am certain she will be a powerful movement lawyer. All panelists, please introduce yourself briefly. Alma, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in this panel. Like Daisy said, I am a DACA recipient. I have organized in the undocumented immigrant community for a while. I think I learned about my status in 2001. And that's when I was a senior in high school. And that's when I started, learning about what my status meant. I am now a mother of 2 children, a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old. I grew up in South Central LA, originally from Guerrero, Mexico. And yeah, I'm really excited to share the space with all of the panelists and, all of you here.
Joseph, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. And it's good to see, you, but then also, Marissa and other folks at Loyola. And, I have sent a quick note to Alma. I have known her I met her when I was in community college in Santa Monica. So good to see folks, from many years ago. So my name is Joseph Villela, currently the Director of Government Relations at the California Wellness Foundation. We are a healthcare foundation that essentially define wealth and well-being of individuals very broadly. We know that healthcare or the well-being of folks is affected by external issues such as gun violence, immigration status, economic justice, as well as environmental justice. And so we provide resources to the community to build political power, but then also organize themselves. I'm also a DACA recipient and I think one of the things that I also came to know, I knew that I was undocumented. Why? Because I came in as such. But one of the hardest part as I was moving through my professional career, but then also my educational career was always been in the limbo per se. And so when AB 540 happened, I was, it occurred in 2001, right after, a year after I graduated from high school. So from that perspective, I've known that system change has a direct impact into individuals' life, because without AB 540, I couldn't have attended community college and then transferred to UCLA. And so in this new capacity and at the Wellness Foundation, my hope is to continue the work that I've been doing, and that is trying to add my little bit of labor into the bigger picture, and that is trying to system change to make sure that folks have opportunities, but then also dismantle some of the systems that have been rooted in racism. And with that, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, Yurie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yurie Blons. I'm a clinical student at the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. I'm also a third-year law student at Loyola Law School. I found out that I was undocumented when I was applying to colleges, like many undocumented people. I also was a beneficiary of AB 540. So I was able to go to UC Berkeley, which is where I found a community of undocumented student organizers. And that was the first time I had come out as undocumented and felt comfortable to talk to strangers about my status. Right before I graduated in 2012, DACA passed. So my worries about, not being able to get a job legally after I graduated, and fears about not being able to use my education in my future work were relieved temporarily. And during that process, I came into contact with UC Berkeley's Human Rights Project, UC Berkeley Laws, and we hosted clinics to help DACA recipients apply for DACA. And so it feels like such a full circle moment now, being at LIJC in a clinic, and also being able to help DACA recipients renew their DACAs today. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm like Alma. I'm also a mother. I'm actually a new mother. My baby's 6 months, yeah, I'm just really glad to be here, and thank you everybody for joining in.
Thank you so much to our panelists for your introductions. I just wanted to briefly describe a little bit more what AB 540 is. Two of you mentioned it, but you know, this is like a predecessor, right, to working up towards DACA. Was this legislation in California that allowed for undocumented students to pay in-state tuition, which made a world of a difference. For those of you that don't know, if you are not a resident of the state, if you're an international student, which was what often undocumented students were categorized as, you had to pay hundreds per unit in comparison to affordable costs that would allow a student from an underserved community to participate in education. So thank you so much for bringing this up, because this goes way back, right, to 2001. And I remember being a first-year college student when AB 540 came into play, and making calls to other students who were eligible, working with groups who were already advocating for some kind of permanent pathway for undocumented students, but calling folks and letting them know what it was so that they too could apply and go to college, like me. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start with what is DACA. So Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, as it is widely known, is a policy that provides temporary protection for undocumented immigrants who entered the U.S. unlawfully as children. The program does not grant an official legal status or pathway to citizenship. It does, however, allow those eligible to obtain a driver's license, Social Security number, and perhaps most importantly, a work permit. DACA was established in 2012 by then President Barack Obama via an executive order. Now, more than a decade later, we have seen DACA under attack various times through legislative groups and individuals who threaten parts of the program all the way to a full repeal. With that, Judy, can you tell us where DACA is now?
Sure. So last year, there was a lawsuit where Texas and 8 other states argued that DACA was unlawful, mainly for procedural reasons. In their decision, the court agreed that the DACA policy was unlawful, but they actually sent back the case to the Texas court for review to consider the Biden administration's federal rule on DACA. This federal rule was intended to formalize and protect the program. So while this review is pending, the courts have maintained a court order that does not allow for new applicants to file DACA, but allows those who are eligible to continue to renew their DACA and apply for advanced parole. For those of you that don't know what advanced parole is a great opportunity for DACA recipients to travel abroad, get rid of previous unlawful entries, and give the opportunity to apply for a green card by offering a protection called 245A. So it basically is like kind of a permit to let you leave the country. However, if you're interested in advanced parole and you are a DACA recipient, please consult an attorney before applying. There are some serious immigration consequences that may happen if you don't consult an attorney. So make sure you do that if you're interested. Also, the future of DACA, unfortunately, we can't predict what the courts are going to do. But if you do have DACA, just continue to renew your DACA if you can. And there are places that have resources, or we have a list of resources where we can tell you where to get help with that. And Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic is another place that helps with DACA renewals.
Thank you so much, Yurie. And as I mentioned previously, we will be sharing resources at the end of the webinar. You also will get it via email where you registered to make sure that you do consult with an attorney if you are looking for any type of assistance with your DACA renewal, with just your immigration status. If you're thinking about doing advanced parole, we'll share that at the end. Thank you so much. So as of today, there is no hearing date, right? As to what we're going to decide or what the government's going to decide on the future of DACA, which brings us back to this state of limbo that was brought up earlier, right? I want to ask the panelists, why is DACA important? And let's go ahead and start with Joseph.
Thank you. And I'll answer that question, but then also add other things that I think are important to raise in regards to the overall immigration system. So I think first, why it's important. Why? Because for about more than 10 years now, has allowed folks that to be seen legally, even though they have contributed to the economy and have done have played by the rules for lack of a better word. And it has allowed them to, at minimum, be able to, to work legally and being seen by a legal system. And in addition to that, it has also proven, and this is based on different research, that once folks are given the opportunity to, to have legal status, many of the folks that were granted DACA have also increased their economic productivity. Either they got a better job, they finished school, they became homeowners, became car owners. And so it also benefit the economy overall. And so DACA was not only important for local economies, the state economies, but also was important for their own families because the wages also increased dramatically for those individuals. In addition to that, many of them have access to employer healthcare because now they are part of the official market, and so that means that employer-based healthcare was available to them. Most importantly, at times they will also have access to a social security number. That if many folks that came here undocumented and work there, all their life here, and then you have a social security number, they don't have access to a retirement or some sort of a safety net once they become elderly. So it opened the door for many folks, about approximately 1.8 million folks, to have access to social security number, but also better opportunities. But I do have to say that there's this misconception about who DACA recipients are. I think, I also forgot to mention that I'm a dad of a 12-year-old. So many of the DACA folks, they have of the perception of that folks have about it that they're young people. We are becoming older. We are parents, many of us. And so that means that the narrative has to change. It's about the whole immigration system. And I do have to say that the US immigration system is pretty much rooted in racism and the economics of the country. It goes all the way to the 1700s when the Naturalization Act was enacted that essentially limited who should become a citizen here in the US. And then you go back all the way to the 1986 when, in 1994, when a lot of the punitive and draconian policies were implemented that allowed many people not to legalize their status. As an example, if I'm married to a citizen, if I came here undocumented, then I cannot fix my status even though I have someone who's a citizen because of the 3 or 10-year bar. The last thing that I will say about DACA, it is not even protected against any minor conviction. If a DACA recipient is convicted or even charged with a DUI or possession of marijuana, which is legal in our state, that is also a way for folks to be deported. So there's also a big number of DACA recipients that were not angels. And I see immigrants are not angels, but person and people with flaws. That means that we make mistakes, and we make one mistake, that means that we can be deported.
Thank you, Joseph. Alma?
Yeah, so pretty much like Joseph said, right, it's very important for us. I remember that when so a lot of my friends, because we are from an older generation of undocumented students, a lot of them were left out when DACA passed because of the age gap, right? So applying even for DACA was really hard for me because I was feeling like my friends were being left out, and they were also organizing for something, for an opportunity for them, and they didn't make it because of the age gap. So once I finally decided to apply for DACA and I received my work permit and I obtained my first job with DACA, I learned about benefits and I learned about vacation time. I never had that privilege. That was so like mind blowing for me. Like, what, you're telling me I can take vacation time? Wow. You know, that was very beautiful. And it took me back to my parents. They worked so much, long hours for almost every day. And they never got that privilege. They never got to experience that. And so while I was, you know, getting all these benefits from being a DACA recipient, I always carry my parents' stories because they never had the opportunity to experience what I was experiencing. And so, you know, that's part of like how important it is for us to have a chance. I mean, it's a human right? That's part of our human rights. We also want to live a life where we don't have to stress about, you know, not having enough money to pay our rent or food insecurities. You know, it's just very important. However, we do still live in limbo, right? Every time we hear that the court is reviewing DACA again, we tend to, I feel like we normalize feeling the fear of not having DACA anymore and losing our jobs, being in the limbo and thinking of what are we going to do to survive when we're already parents? How are we going to, you know, be able to maintain that financial support for our children, for our families? And so it's just a lot of things that we kind of just put on the side, right? And when all this like hearings, the court hearings happen again, it's like, oh, here we go again. And I feel like for the older generation, we grew up not having really much. We had AB 540, and I'm really grateful for everyone who worked for AB 540 because I was able to benefit from that right after high school. But at the same time, it's like we didn't have the California Dream Act. We had to work because we couldn't apply for scholarships or financial aid. So it was, I think that we learned kind of like how to survive those things. As for the newer generation with DACA, I feel like it's harder for them, right? Because they feel like if DACA doesn't get, if it gets taken away from us, how are they going to survive? How are they going to like live without DACA because they don't know how to, or how we did it in past years when we were growing up. And so I feel that it's really important for us to continue contributing to the economy, but also just for our well-being. I think that our mental health, we have gone through family separation. My older brother got deported and he got kidnapped in Mexico after he got deported. So just living with that trauma and that pain and that sadness is just not okay, you know. So DACA is super important for us, and also it's also very important for us to think of other ways where we can make this program permanent and also obtain something that will be beneficial for more people, right? More inclusive. And we don't have to fear getting separated from our families or losing our jobs. I work in a hospital. I work as a community healthcare worker, and I love to help people. I love my patients. I love to be in the emergency department and helping those in need. You know, we're right in downtown LA, very close to where I grew up in South Central LA. And it's just that fear of what is going to happen if I'm not able to continue doing the work that I love. So yeah, so that's what DACA is for me. And yeah.
Thank you, Alma. Yurie, you want to share?
Sure. So DACA, Joseph and Alma said, I'm gonna kind of repeat a couple of things, but DACA is really important because it allows DACA recipients to work and earn and support for their families, especially for members of families who are not eligible for deferred action. So that's really important. DACA gives folks access to higher education. Alma had mentioned like the California Dream Act and AB 40 and things like that. Those programs help DACA recipients receive higher education. DACA also allows for some undocumented people to receive professional licenses, like in California, for example. If you are a DACA recipient, you can get, you can pass the California bar and become an attorney. And that's only for some states. DACA also gives people access to better, more stable jobs, and to use their talents and skills to their full use. It also gives people better working conditions, and it helps avoid exploitation. When I didn't have DACA and I was working under the table, there were many times where my boss would threaten me and tell me that he would report me to the authorities if I didn't do something that he asked me to. Sometimes he would withhold pay, and I felt like I couldn't do anything. So with DACA, it allows for folks to avoid those exploitations. It also allows for you to get a driver's license. So if in places like LA, if you don't have a driver's license, you can't go to work. So DACA allowed a lot of us to get driver's licenses. And also it has given us temporary relief for not having to worry about ourselves being deported. Unfortunately, like the others have mentioned, it is under limbo, and there are many of our family members who don't get this temporary relief. And there are a lot of problems with DACA, which I'm sure we'll discuss later, but at least it gives us a 2-year protection.
Thank you so much to everyone. You know, Joseph mentioned the misconception of the DACA recipient being a young person, and you all kind of shared in that misconception, but this idea, right, of they're young people, so they're children, hence they're innocent, right? Which reminded me of the often flawed argument of the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, who deserves to live here, and all of that, right? So I love that idea of shifting the narrative to highlight what healthy communities look like, right? When we have the opportunity to gain an education, if we want to pursue one, a career, and we wish to go out on our own and create our own businesses, as many DACA recipients have. If you know we're not well physically, we're not well mentally, we're not well emotionally, and we need to seek healthcare, being able to do that legally, that's affordable and that is accessible to everyone. Having families stay together, right? Having the opportunity to raise our children in safety and wellness, all of that is important. When I think of DACA, I think of these healthy communities and why we need to preserve them. So thank you so much for sharing what you all have shared. You all already kind of spoke a little bit as to how DACA has affected you personally or your area of work. I wonder, is there anything else you all want to share in terms of the folks that you work with?
I think for me, like I just wanted to take understanding, most students they join and then how it's connected to their own work, but then also, in California, just be mindful that for folks to understand that because of all the courts and the limbo, the program is closed for new applicants. So every single year we have undocumented students that are graduated from high school in every state of our nation that may have the opportunity to benefit from the program, but do no longer have access to it. And if they live in Florida, Texas, or a state that has passed draconian policies towards immigrant communities, they might not have access to higher education. I do want to point out that California is a little bit different, as Yurie mentioned and Alma mentioned. There has been a number of laws that not only benefit the undocumented youth, but then also the parents. So I do want to make sure that folks understand that in the absence of legal status for some that are graduating, California, for instance, now, if you're undocumented and are graduating, not only have access to state tuition, and a key component of the state tuition is that it has been litigated in courts and has upheld by the courts, because it does not only benefit undocumented immigrants, it benefits U.S. citizens. So the law was written in a way that indicated that you were a resident if you had lived in the state, but then also graduated or attended school. And the state law has changed. It went from 3 years to 3 years credit, which is not just physical. It's just like if you have the 3 years credit, then you qualify. But then also the opportunity for adults who went to adult school and finished that to also have access to AB 540. Once you have access to AB 540, then you have access to what is called the California Dream Act. I was mentioned financial aid. But then on top of that, several laws were passed that you are now have access to receive work study, something that it was never attainable for undocumented students. And then the other component is that you have access now if you're undocumented, regardless of DACA, to be appointed to a commission or a board by the governor or local government. So California has moved to a place in which it's not perfect, but a minimum some protection has been created to make sure that every single undocumented folk is recognized, but then it's protected under law. And so I think I just want to really highlight that even though we're talking about DACA, that the benefits are minimum to just this in the population, but that doesn't mean that the state or local government cannot move forward. So this is kind of like a call to upcoming attorneys that if they are considering, to be in public service, that there's a space for them from all over the state of California to be mindful of this, but then also even at the local level, public defenders in LA County have access now, have to be trained in regards to immigration consequences, because at one point, legal permanent residents were being deported because of the plea that they were taking. So immigration is very complex, and I think it's kind of a call for upcoming attorneys to be mindful of that and whatever industry they go into to consider this population.
Thank you. Yurie or Alma, do you wish to add anything to that? Thank you so much, Joseph. If not, no worries. We're going to go ahead and move on to what have been the limitations that you all see or challenges with DACA. We've mentioned a few, but how have you seen it in your own experience?
I think for me, again, like just, knowing people that were left out, right, of deferred action, and that definitely brought limitations to my loved ones, to my friends. Definitely still being in the limbo, I feel it's a limitation as well, because although we have better jobs now, just not knowing what's going to happen next is always it's mentally draining at the same time. I think that for us in the panel, it seems that we have been knowing of our status since 2000 or 2001. So that's a lot of years, and a lot of things have changed, right? So yeah, we have some great things happening now. Grateful for that, but there's still a lot of work to do, right? Families are still getting deported. Every morning I drive through Alameda, and right in front of the Metropolitan Detention Center, every morning I see it, and it's just, the feelings don't go away. It's just the same sadness, knowing there's people there who are going to get deported any minute now. It's just so inhumane. So definitely brings a lot of limitations to, like, yeah, we have better jobs, we have benefits. It really benefits our organizations, our workplace. I'm a program manager now, so running a whole program in the emergency department. So we are very skillful people, we have the knowledge, we have the skills, we're hardworking people. So, but just knowing that we're still in the limbo, that brings a lot of limits to us. Talking to our children about what it could look like, because they hear that DACA might end, or they're very aware of, at least my children are really aware of what is going on with the immigrant community. And so it's just like, how do we limit their childhood and growing into this healthy, happy, years when they also fear that their parents are going to get deported. So it's just different navigation that limits us from just living a life with dignity, right? We all deserve that. Among all the other things happening now, right? With police brutality and everything in our communities, but that's the limitations that I see in my personal life and with in my circles and spaces.
So like Alma mentioned, DACA is not a permanent solution, and there's this limbo. There's not a pathway to citizenship for many DACA recipients. And a lot of people don't know, but DACA actually expires every 2 years, which means that every 2 years, DACA recipients have to raise $495 for the application. And then that doesn't count the attorney fees that they need to go see an attorney. So there's just like a tremendous amount of money that you have to put up to even get DACA in the first place. And not everybody has access to those funds. So that's a big challenge that I see, especially with our clients at LIJC. There's also this like constant fear and anxiety, even if you know your application is going to get approved, when you turn it in, it's always scary, right? And you always have that anxiety. Oh, what if like the officer that's looking at my application is having a bad day? Like, am I going to be denied? So there's always this fear and anxiety that's there. DACA also has really stringent requirements. Like we mentioned earlier, it leaves a lot of people out. For example, there's like this weird requirement that you had to be here on June 15th, 2012. And if you can't prove that, then you will have a hard time getting DACA. You may not even get it. You also have to have been under the age of 31 as of June 15, 2012. So it leaves a lot of undocumented people out, which is a huge problem. And also DACA recipients, even though they have Social Security numbers, they still don't qualify for federal aid programs like, you know, food stamps, federal college financial aid, Medicaid, those things, which were really important to have during the pandemic. And this is something that really upsets me because DACA recipients pay taxes for these programs, yet they don't benefit from them. So that's a huge limitation and challenge that I see.
I think for me, two main limitations, and that were kind of alluded to. One is the path to citizenship. So folks right now, if they were to be quote unquote online or in a line. So I think this narrative that, you know, people should be, you know, get in line and get the papers, there is no line. The system is so broken that it does not allow it, but assuming that there is a line, usually takes, you know, after you become a legal resident, you have 3 to 5 years, depending on how you got your green card, to have access to citizenship. So at this point, many of the folks, if we were quote unquote on a line, we should be able to have access to citizenship, which that entails key components of, you know, of safety. One is the safety to know that you cannot be deported. Again, it's important for folks to understand that if you're not a citizen, you could be deported because the law, immigration laws change dramatically, including LPR or legal permanent residence. And there's several cases of veterans who went and fought a war somewhere. They came back, they made a mistake, and they're legal permanent residents, they are deported. So I think just be mindful that citizenship is the only protection that you have over any type of deportation. So I think, you know, that's one. But the second thing that comes from actual safety of not being deported is the your voting power. I've done political work for many years, and I'm a 40-year-old man that has not been able to vote neither on my native country nor here. So I think that's a big component of the restrictions that we have and the limitations that we have, is that if we are paying taxes, the whole construction of this country, or, you know, at one point is no tax, you know, you get taxed and you get representation. We have 11 million people that pay taxes every single year, and they have no path towards that representation. The last thing that I will say is I read this book, The Door of No Return. This African-American author who goes into his native land, and many DACA recipients at times don't have access to just going back and enjoy vacations in their motherland. And there's a question about what is that has done for folks and their families not being reconnected with with their motherland and know themselves and find themselves and essentially, reconcile the two histories that we have. One, when what we left, and the one we were uprooted for many external factors. And at times there is an identity crisis that many folks go through. And so being able to go back to the motherland without asking for permission. And so advanced parole is something that you have to ask permission to the government, and it's the discretion of the government, and you're not 100% sure that you're going to get it, and it's very limited. So just that thing that, many folks take for granted, just going back to your motherland and maybe visit folks that you haven't seen, or just reconnect with your identity.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Do you mind typing in the chat the title of the book? I don't think I caught the whole thing, the whole title. Thank you for sharing that. I'm reminded that DACA came as an executive order in response to federal legislation, to the DREAM Act, that did offer a pathway to citizenship for folks, right? And so when I think about the limitations and the areas that we definitely failed with DACA, is those parts that make it so that it's temporary. There is no permanency to it, right? You still have to look at an uncertain future because you have a work permit that's tied to DACA that expires every couple of years. There's a financial strain to it. There is that stress that comes on hearing and knowing constantly, because DACA is constantly under attack in legislation, right? Of whether or not DACA will continue, with the hundreds and hundreds of young folks who are now eligible, would be eligible, but are not able to apply because there are no more opportunity to apply for first-time DACA recipients, right? There's only renewal. So for me, it definitely hits hard to know that even though this is the most successful policy of immigration integration in the last 3 decades, it's not permanent. So there's a lot of work still to be done, right? Thank you all for sharing with that. Today, if you all can share, what can we do to support of DACA recipients, in support of something that is permanent?
So what can you do to support DACA recipients? I think you could support local organizations and nonprofits that do work with DACA recipients, DACA renewal workshops, scholarships for DACA eligible individuals, or other resources. One organization that you could support is LIJC, for example. Be politically active, call your senator, vote for those DACA recipients that can't vote, right? And also, I think another one that I think is really important is, if you know any DACA recipients and you know programs and resources, share them. A lot of times when you're in survival mode and you have tunnel vision, you can't see all these things that are there to help you. So be mindful of that, and just spread awareness about resources, because you could help somebody that may not be seeing those.
Yeah, I feel like also having, continuing to have, like Yurie said, right, those additional support resources. Like here in Loyola, I know that you do have the support to pay for DACA renewal fees, and that has been really helpful. I know some of my friends that have benefited from this support. I myself have benefited from this support by you all, my sisters. So it's just, it's really helpful because a lot of families have more than one DACA recipient, right? So they have like 2 or 3, and so it accumulates. It's really hard. So yeah, just having those additional supports, continuing that work that you all are doing. Also being mindful that organizing is very important, right? Now we have a whole new generation of organizers. And so following each other's leads and how we can continue to work for something that can be more inclusive. Yes, we have DACA now, and yes, Barack Obama signed it, but also there were a lot of students that were protesting in his headquarters while he was in campaign, right? So all of that pressure gave us DACA, right? All of those students who were inside that office, doing hunger strikes, protesting, risking deportation, that was all organizing. So I think that's key also. Having, following the lead of those who are directly impacted and how we can support their efforts, as well as nonprofits, right? That have that privilege to be able to support. It's very important. I think also just checking in with each other. I mentioned how hearing that DACA is again in the courts being discussed, if it's going to terminate or not, it's very mentally draining. So just checking in with your peers who are DACA recipients, who might not be, but are still like affected mentally by all of this. We're being attacked every day almost by the system. So, just checking in with each other, I feel it's very important. And yeah, just following what you're all doing, your work, and how we can support it.
I think for me, like echo, what Yurie and Alma said, but I think just adding, just be curious, as upcoming attorneys or professionals in the legal service, you have to, a legal field, you have to ask yourself, have a level of curiosity about, and ask questions about what can you do or what could be helpful. At times that could lead to a solution, or that lead to a positive interaction. As Alma mentioned, just checking in with people, but first it has to start with the curiosity about like, what is this program? What does it mean to me? And then just ask, questions that might lead to a positive change.
Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely you all hit on things that came to mind when I thought about this question, right? So at the government level, being able to contact your elected officials, locally, statewide, to make a nationwide impact, right? But also just here on the ground locally, when I think about all the advocates that have come before us and those working on now, not just to benefit DACA recipients, because again, initially, DACA wasn't the end goal. It was permanent residency and then citizenship, right? And our legislative leaders at various times have failed to pass something that is beneficial and that it's permanent. So here locally, being able to join organizers in the forces that be to make sure that things are going the way that we want them to go, that it's not just continuous temporary status, right? We want something that's permanent, because we understand that that holistic approach really completes a person to then go on and continue to support their families, their communities, the economy. It's just, the impact is just tremendous, right? We see it with our folks who apply for citizenship too, have been legal permanent residents for a long time. Their political power, once they're able to vote, is pretty astonishing. Once, especially our folks who have been residents for a long time, once they become citizens, they become lifelong voters, which is just amazing to me. So being able to offer that opportunity to everyone is something that's definitely in mind when I think about our documented folks. And then just lastly, I heard Yurie mention some of like, if you can help cover the filing fees, the filing costs, please do, right? So that kind of one-on-one advocacy. I was reminded earlier this week of folks who are just not aware that someone with a work permit can work legally here in the US because of an organization that was not allowing someone to basically apply for a job or get the job if they weren't residents or citizens. So if you're able to do that advocacy at your own work by talking to folks who perhaps just don't know the law, that's incredible, right? If you're able to push your own employer to make sure that they're inclusive of everyone who does have permission to work legally, that's great. And then of course, if you're able to help financially to support covering filing fees, right? Right now, we have funds with the clinic to cover those filing fees for anyone who is doing a renewal, but that's not always the case. And so similarly, like Alma said, oftentimes a family member will have mixed status, but they might have more than one person applying for DACA renewals. And what we've seen in the past is that the family will come together to choose, and will choose one recipient. They'll pay for that person first, and then they'll move on to raise funds to help the second person, right? So if we don't have that funding available, it falls on the DACA applicant, right? So being able to provide those funds goes a long way, whether it is in your own family, in your own communities, pushing local legislation to make sure that that funding is available so that organizations like ours can continue to help folks to apply. Something else that came up was advance parole, right? That permission to leave the country with permission, it's another cost. So you still have to apply with a different application. You have to cover that filing fee, wait for it to come back, and then go on and leave the country within the parameters. But that is available right now, and that is definitely something that we saw being attacked under the Trump administration, right? Where they just gutted it and made it so that it was very difficult to obtain. So we do urge folks, if you are a DACA recipient, to look into advanced parole, because we don't know the future. What it allows, if you are able to be paroled back in, is then for you to then look for a possible adjustment of status in the country. So if that's something that sounds like you might qualify, please speak to an attorney before you apply, because there are various things that you need to take into consideration, but you could benefit from it if you are eligible, okay? Something else, because DACA and immigration is constantly changing, is that just recently the payment form for the filing fee just changed. So now what used to be you could pay for the filing fee with one money order, one check, is now being broken up into two. And if that new guideline isn't met, it's likely just gonna get kicked back, okay? So please know that there are some new guidelines that went into effect just recently, where you do have to pay separately for your fingerprints, your biometrics, and the filing fee versus just one check, okay? I did want to ask our Q&A coordinators if we have any questions to the panel that we want to address.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. Marissa, do you have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, so I think I just want to introduce everybody and introduce myself. My name is Marissa Montes, and I am a professor here at Loyola Law School and the director for the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. And I have the pleasure of working with Daisy and having Yurie as my student. Thank you so much to Alma and Joseph for also participating as part of this panel and sharing your personal experiences as DACA recipients. What I just really wanted to highlight is something that I think is very important, is stressing the importance of taking advantage of advanced parole at this time. As Yurie mentioned, even though there is an injunction in place, those who are currently enrolled into the program can continue renewing their DACA applications, which gives them deferred action, which is basically deferment from deportation, right? And then also gives you access to a work permit, but also gives you access to something called advanced parole. Advanced parole is a travel document that allows you to exit the country and come back in, right? On the basis of either a humanitarian, education, or business purpose. The great thing about advanced parole is that not only does it allow you to go back to potentially your home country, or it can be anywhere in the world, actually, so long as you ask or request to go on one of those 3 bases. Is that it coming back, you basically kind of cure any previous illegal entry you may have had as a kid, right? Or if you entered unlawfully, by now having a lawful admission into the United States. That in itself doesn't open up the avenue for a green card, but does make it easier. So let's say, like in Yurie's case, you entered lawfully on your passport, you entered as a on advanced parole, and then you get married to a US citizen. You can do the entire application process to obtain your adjustment or your green card while being within the United States. And so this is why it's really important, if you're interested in this, to consult with an immigration attorney about it. The reason being too, is that sometimes DACA recipients are unaware of maybe other additional immigration bars they may have that might be as a result of, I'm trying to think, multiple entries and exits, previous deportation orders, that if you get advanced parole and you leave, you may not be able to return, which I know is very scary for DACA recipients, which is why it's so important that you please, if you're interested in doing an AP, that you speak to an immigration attorney that clears your case and make sure that you would be safe in traveling abroad and coming back. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Thinking right now that you mentioned you can travel anywhere in the world. Because we've been doing this work for a while, we've helped hundreds of documented folks, and it reminds me that of some folks who have just we have this one person who went to London as a film producer and was able to do this whole movie on her own journey as an undocumented person here in the U.S. But came back because she had advanced parole. So just kind of the impact that folks who have DACA, just witnessing what they've been able to do and how it's basically changed the lives of everyone that I've met, for sure. One thing that has been incredibly obvious is just how outstanding documented folks are, because they've been able to push through all of the obstacles that come with being an undocumented person, and yet still are able to reach their personal and career goals. I wonder if any of the panelists have any tips, any advice for someone who might be struggling right now with just being in a position where perhaps they're just trying to get, a BA or an AA. They're just starting their careers.
I go and I take this opportunity. I may have to run. I've been called to go back to a meeting that I stepped back. But one of the things that, again, this is the audience is our attorney. So I think for me, it's more about folks that may be in, undocumented or documented that are thinking about the legal profession. It's, understanding that as Yurie mentioned, that even if you have no DACA, you have access to be able to take the bar exam and be recognized in the state of California. Is one of the few states that have that without being documented per se. I think for folks that are documented, the question is for them, how can they increase their professional network, and how allies that may be citizens or PR become the professional network to refer them to opportunities that they may not know. One of the things that I did struggle when I graduated is, one of the big things about being professional is your social capital. So many undocumented folks may not have social capital. So if you know folks that are undocumented or documented, and you are familiar with one of the things that could be helpful to them is lend your social capital to them, make those connections for them, because at times it's difficult. In philanthropy, in government, it's difficult to do that. And so I think if you're an ally, make sure that you connect those documented folks to those professional networks, and that may actually make a big difference as they move up to a different field, or we open the doors for folks to organizations or to spaces that have not traditional hired people of color or documented folks.
I think also just looking for organizations like on campus. At a lot of the UCs, they have undocumented student programs, and in those spaces, they, have a lot of resources for you. I don't know what they have at other schools, but it is really nice to be able to talk to other undocumented students in those types of circles. But also echoing what Joseph said, if you are interested in like law school or anything like that, I don't know if I can put my email in the chat, but if you're documented and undocumented and interested in pursuing law school, I'm always an email away, so please reach out. I'm happy to do a Zoom or whatever, and we can chat. So
what I will say is, well, I agree with what Joseph and Judy mentioned. I would just add to just trust your process. This is not easy to navigate. The system itself is not easy to navigate, and just trust that you are doing what you should be doing, or what feels right to you, right? Just trust that it's your journey. You are valid. We exist. And there's a lot of support and resources out there. I know that, as Judy was mentioning, on campus, you can find centers that support undocumented students. We have the Dream Centers, for example, in some of the call states, right? Actually, one of the co-founders of Dreams to be Heard at CSUN, we now have a Dream Center, which we didn't have when I was there, but it's amazing. We received a lot of support from the Chicanos department at CSUN, the Central American Studies department. So there's just a lot of support. So don't feel that you're alone. It's a lot of us that are also navigating the system like you. And yeah, just find that support that will help you. I know that in my personal life and in school, is just having friends that I could talk to that were in the same situation as me really gave me strength. I did mention organizing, but also it's just okay to take some time for you to, for your well-being as well. So yeah, just, reach out. I can also add my email. I mean, I work in the community health field, but, if accessing the healthcare system is also very challenging. So if I can be of any help with that, just feel free to email me. Daisy does have my email. So yeah, just keep going. It will be okay. We will be okay.
Thank you so much. And then thank you to Joseph. I know he had to run. Of course, we all carry so many other responsibilities. So I'm just so grateful that we were able to gather this group together with all the information that we've been able to share. Something else that comes to mind is often when we build community, right? Sometimes we're the first ones who have to establish something. So it might be you who, if there is no Dream Center or other supports that are visible, trust me, there's still other people who are in the same boat and who will connect with you. But they're probably also thinking like, what do we do? So maybe it might be on you to kind of help get that started and then hopefully see that flourish. We did have one question from someone who's asking for more specific information on how to submit funding support for renewals and other fees. So if the question is, I have financial ability to support by donating to the clinic or to other folks who do similar work, please feel free to shoot us an email with the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. And then also, Stephanie, I don't know if you're able to post up again on the chat our information for the clinic. If you yourself need financial assistance for a renewal, please hit us up there so that we can follow up with you. And like I said, right now, We do have assistance for those who are eligible to cover the filing fee. So please do let us know. And then, yeah, if you're someone who can help by a donation, that's always perfect. And it's a great way for us to continue to do the work that we do. I'm going to close in a little bit, but before I do that, are there any final thoughts from any of our panelists? Marissa?
No, just wanted to echo what you were saying based on the question that we had, is that right now there are many organizations that have access to funding. We are one of them when it comes to covering the source of the filing fee. We will be, and Daisy, correct me if I'm wrong, also dispersing information as to places, just general resources. And I would recommend that, if, I don't know what part of the US you are all in, but reach out to your local nonprofits who do immigrant rights work. Donate to them as well, be it either if you're seeking to provide assistance in covering a filing fee, or, support the legal services or nonprofit legal services. We do what we can with the funding that we have. And then lastly, somebody just dropped into the Q&A a link regarding LMU establishing a Dream Center. And just to echo and back up what Daisy, the comments the panelists were making as to like what can DACA recipients can do. I am not a DACA recipient. I am an immigrant, but will never know what it's actually like to be undocumented. And I do have a lot of students who are DACA recipients who are undocumented themselves. And I really do think that there is power in community. And I can only imagine as to how sometimes it must be like a lonely process, or that you may be the only one. So it's really important to seek out a community at your local college, school, or wherever you may be. Many universities have established Dream Centers, and make sure to go there to meet other folks who are just like you and seek support.
I will also say or add that another way to support is in the high schools, right? Like we did mention that there are a lot of high school students that are graduating that unfortunately are not able to apply for DACA at the moment. So I feel like there's a need for having that support in high schools with the counselors, or if you have a well-being center, I don't know, or some type of center that can support, voicing that need, that is needed and it's important, and maybe facilitating trainings in high schools for counselors. I remember that in 2001, the way I found out is my counselor was summoning me to apply for a college because I hadn't started the process yet. And so he asked me to bring my social security number, which I didn't know if I had one or not. So I went home and I asked my mom for one. And that's when she told me, you don't have one because we're undocumented. So when I went back to tell my counselor, he told me that unfortunately I was not going to be able to attend college, that the best for me was to ask my mom to ask her employer to employ me to work at the sweatshop with her. And for me, it broke my heart because I knew that my parents brought me to go to college. So he was telling me I couldn't go. And then he just made this whole thing of for me to explain how I came to this country by detail. And so that was really hard for me to explain to him. And so I remember going home and being really mad with my parents of why they even brought me to be in this situation. And so that was really hard. We navigated that situation. They supported me. I am now very grateful for them and that sacrifice that they did for me and my siblings. But I think just going back to how important it is to have staff that have all this information that can be supportive to the students at the moment right now, it's just very important because you just don't know how you're impacting that student when you don't have the right information. So I think that's one of the things that you can also do if you work in a high school, just bring that support for the students.
And then I just want to add one more thing because Alma triggered it. The importance of, supporting our undocumented youth, especially those who will not be able to age into the DACA program. Well, we don't know what's going to happen, right? But stressing the importance of obtaining a consultation. There's been so many times that we've been out in the community where DACA recipients come in or undocumented youth come in for a consultation to see if they can obtain DACA. And then as we are working with them, it turns out they qualify for other forms of relief. Something that we see commonly, especially among children, is something called SIGIS, Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, for kids that may have had one or both parent absence, depending on the facts. And that allows them to actually open up the pathway for them to obtain residency. And we have been successful of identifying kids at a young enough age that by the time they graduate high school, we obtain residency for them, and then they're able to access financial aid. And I know that it's really scary sometimes to put yourself out there and seek a consultation. But we, along with many other nonprofits in the LA area, offer free consultations, and you might as well just come and be aware of what you potentially have access to.
Thank you so much to everyone. Yes, and even though this is a panel where we were discussing DACA specifically, this, like Marissa said, really to anyone who is undocumented, you never know what you might be eligible for, right? And immigration is constantly changing. So we also, encourage you not to lose hope if, for example, right now you're not eligible for something, but to be proactive and make sure that you are talking to an attorney who knows about immigration law to see if anything has changed, right? Or if you have any questions, and you never know, there might be something already in place that you just weren't aware of. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much, Alma, Joseph, Yurie. Thank you so much to our Sisters of St. John's of Orange and to everyone who joined us today. I just want to leave everyone with the thought that our humanity is tied together. So even for those who are opposing DACA, think about what a healthy community looks like and how is it that we prosper together when we're able to lift up everyone in community. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.